Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, my name is Molly and I'm originally from Atlanta, but when I got married to my husband Wayne, we both moved to rural Kentucky, where we converted the original plain white farmhouse into a beautiful idyllic shabby chic style lemon yellow cottage, which is surrounded by a white picket fence. Our beautiful garden is filled with large old oak trees and flower beds bursting at the seams with colourful blooms, complemented by a perfectly manicured lawn, which my husband Dwayne keeps in perfect condition all year round. Where I live, it's very rural and quite remote, with a beautiful lake downtown and plenty of untouched forest and countryside, which is perfect for would-be hikers and all those adventurous types that love to go exploring. Naturally, it goes without saying that there's a great deal of wildlife in our area. Sometimes you do get deer on our property, but more often than not, they tend to stay in the untouched areas of natural habitat, which consists of large, lush green forests, silvery lakes, beautiful meadows, and glorious valleys. My Bigfoot encounter happened in the fall of 2009, which is my favourite part of the year, because I simply adore those yellow carpets of glorious gold that literally caress the forest floor in regal splendour. I just think those shimmering gold autumn colours are utterly magnificent. My story starts when I had just had the most horrendous day at work. My boss was in an extremely foul mood, and he literally lost it with me over a report that I had filed, which he claimed was not up to my usual meticulous standards. I was flabbergasted because I considered it to be one of my finest pieces of work to date, but he completely trashed it, so imagine how I felt. I was totally demoralized and completely downtrodden. Yet the day did get worse, believe it or not. My neighbour phoned me in a dreadful state about a large branch from a tree of mine that had fallen into his property due to a heavy windstorm. "What are you going to do about it?" he screamed. "This monstrosity is ruining my garden." "I will sort something out," I assured him. "I can hardly do anything about it now. I'm at work." As I drove my car through the rural back roads to my home, I was feeling completely defeated and deflated. It had been a terrible, terrible day, and I just could not wait to get home, to wind down and relax and finally put my feet up. You know that feeling. Suddenly I noticed a log strewn across the road, creating a barricade, and I literally held my steering wheel and screamed, "Oh!" It felt so good to release all that pent-up tension that had escalated throughout the day. Could the day get any worse, I wondered. I was about to find out. I slammed the door as I got out of my vehicle. It looked like someone had purposely blocked up the road, and I'm afraid my thoughts did wander to my neighbour. Had he done this to get his back on me, I wondered? It would be the sort of thing he would do. This neighbour of mine was an elderly man called Mr. Dixon, who everybody loved to hate. People in our area called him Mr. Grumps because he never wore a smile, and whenever he opened his mouth, it was invariably always to grumble and complain about something. Over the years, he had been known for his retaliatory behaviour. On one occasion, when our chickens wandered into his yard, he literally threw his dog feces over our garden wall in an act of revenge. And one time, he even threw snails over my wall so that they would eat up all my plants. It was early evening and it was growing dark outside as the sun started to set. I marvelled at the spectacular yellow sunset mingled with the pretty shades of pink that blanketed the whole valley in glorious golden crimson tones. Luckily, the log was not so heavy, so I pushed it to the side of the road. What a nasty piece of work Mr. Dixon was, I thought angrily. It was hardly my fault that a branch from our tree had fallen into his yard. As I was about to get back into my car to drive away, I suddenly had this ominous feeling that I was being watched, and it was such a creepy feeling. I could actually feel the hairs on my arms standing on end, and I had visible goosebumps. I looked around at the valley with its ubiquitous trees and thick underlayers of long grasses and shrubbery, and I wondered if I had imagined it all. The early evening felt unusually quiet, and literally the stillness set my nerves on edge. Something was very wrong, I thought. There was no late afternoon, early evening birdsong, which I was used to. It was weird, to say the least. I got back into my car and drove off with that airy feeling still haunting my belly. When I got home, my yellow Labradors were lying on the ground with bellies that were so swollen and inflated they looked like they were 9 months pregnant. They lay on their backs on my white and black kitchen floor, barely being able to move a muscle. What on earth is wrong with Myrtle and Tiger? I asked my husband in horror. Should we not be taking them to the vet? Their stomachs are unnaturally distended and bloated. I'm afraid they managed to break open the huge bag of dog food I bought, said my husband. I came in here and found that they had gobbled up a month's supply of food between the two of them in one sitting. You have got to be kidding, I said in horror. This really had been quite a day. The following morning, when I left for work once again, that horrible neighbour of mine had replaced the log in the centre of the road, and so I got out once again to pull it to one side. Thank goodness it's Friday, I thought. I've had about as much as I can take. I have the weekend to look forward to now. Let's hope the day goes by fast and that my boss is in a better mood. As I was moving the log to the side of the road, I thought I detected a dark, shadowy form moving behind a tree. I was sure whatever this thing was, it was the same creature I had seen watching me the day before. I could feel those predatory eyes on me, and it made me feel uneasy. I looked around, and again I saw nothing. That evening the same thing happened all over again, and the log was once again lying across the road. Now I was mad with Mr. Dixon. I was going to give him a piece of my mind when I got home, I thought angrily. As I got out of the car, the breeze was blowing in a southerly direction, and I got a whiff of the most god-awful smell. It smelt like urine, sweat, feces and skunk, all blended together in a hideous gaseous cocktail. Once again I thought I saw the dark, shadowy form peering at me from behind a tree, and I could tell that whatever it was watching me, and I felt incredibly uncomfortable. I was very certain that whatever this thing was that was spying on me, this behaviour was not common in any animal species that I knew. Creatures that tend to stalk their prey, like wild cats, coyotes, panthers and mountain lions, tend to be low on the ground, whereas this thing, whatever it was, appeared to be tall and large, and I did not think it was a bear, because bears don't behave like this. When I got home that evening, my dogs were still happily sleeping off and digesting a month's supply of food, and were in very good moods. I think they must have really enjoyed their pig out. I, on the other hand, was furious, and I phoned up Mr. Dixon and gave him a piece of my mind. "How dare you keep putting that log in the middle of the back road when I leave for work?" I shouted. "I know you were put out by the tree trunk falling into your garden, but my husband has sorted all that out for you, so why are you doing all this?" "I did not put any log in the back road," screamed Mr. Dixon. "And as for your husband, he did a crap job removing that tree branch. He scratched some paint off the side of the fence, and messed it up. Good, I said. You deserve that, Mr. Dixon. Shut up, you bitch, came Mr. Dixon's reply. I knew you lot were trouble when you pulled down that perfectly good farmhouse and changed it into a god-awful designer cottage. It's called shabby chic, Mr. Dixon, I corrected, and it's a big improvement from the old house that was there before. Not in my opinion, snapped Mr. Dixon, slamming down the phone. The next morning I overslept, but thankfully it was a Saturday and I could take it easy. I decided I'd have a lazy day and potter around the garden and then later take the dogs for a walk in the late afternoon in the forest, near to where I'd seen that dark shadowy form the day prior. I was hoping that I'd be able to figure out what that creature was with the protection of my 2 yellow labs in tow. I knew the dogs needed to work off the excess calories they consumed because yellow labs are prone to obesity and my dogs would literally eat themselves to death if they could. They just love food that much. We entered the forest, which smelt beautiful and was carpeted with golden showers of glorious leaves all over the ground, and so when you walk you literally crunch the leaves under your feet. It was a beautiful breezy day with a slight chill because winter was on the horizon and the days were starting to get darker earlier. The dogs ran around the forest in delight, sniffing the ground in gusto, and then they sped off at immense speed into the depths of the forest, leaving me far behind, something that they would normally never do. I was naturally annoyed because my dogs are usually well behaved, which was why I would take them into the forest without their leashes on, because they are friendly animals that are not remotely aggressive and they love everyone, including all breeds of dog, both large and small. I called after them, but they did not respond. Tiger, Myrtle, I called, come back at once. Tiger, Myrtle, Tiger, Myrtle, Tiger, Myrtle, come back. Tiger, Myrtle, Tiger. As I ran into the forest, I noticed that horrible odour again that I had smelt the day before, and it was awful. I clenched my nostrils tightly and called out for my dogs again, but was met with total silence. Tiger, Myrtle, where are you? Come on, Tiger, Myrtle. I suddenly realised how spooky and creepy the forest felt, because it was so unnaturally quiet, but not in a peaceful way. In my gut I knew something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't put the pieces together and figure it all out. All I can say is I sensed this ominous, foreboding presence. Maybe other animals felt it too, because there was no sign of a darting squirrel or a curious chipmunk, nor was there the cheerful bird song that I loved so very much. But suddenly I heard this gobbling sound, as if creatures were eating something in a hurry, and as I ventured deep into the woods, that was when I saw my yellow labs tearing at a hefty carcass of a recently killed moose. And believe me, it was fresh, because the body was still warm to the touch. I grew very concerned. This was a freshly killed carcass, so the predator who it belonged to could be around and potentially could kill my dogs and myself, and we could both or all be in danger. Suddenly I heard this low guttural growl, and that noise was incapacitating. It went right through me, causing my whole body to shake uncontrollably. All I know is that I was filled with this overwhelming dread, and I knew that something quite terrible was about to transpire. The growling continued and got closer and closer and louder and louder. Then we saw him, this monstrous creature, the likes of such I have never seen before, and in my eyes far more terrifying than an encounter with a large cat, such as even a tiger. This creature was gargantuan, and there are no other words to describe him. He was massive, powerful, and exceedingly strong. So strong, in fact, that it would have been nothing for him to have taken down the 700-pound deer in a heartbeat that my dogs were now devouring. This creature, whatever in God's name it was, must have been at the very least 8 foot tall and 900 pounds, and possibly even more. He looked like a giant-sized man, but he was not a man, or a giant ape, but he was not an ape. It was like there were two DNA profiles that had merged together to create this monstrous beast that some weird scientist had let loose into the forests of Kentucky. Well, those were my thoughts at the time, as I wondered what on earth this creature was, and how to react to it in a way that would not end up with either of my dogs and myself being fatally wounded. This creature was covered with thick, dark hair, and it looked like it was coated with mud all over, and it stank to high heaven of urine and feces. I noticed that the arms were long, and the head was shaped like half an egg that sat on a pair of massive shoulders without much of a neck, and the face was hairless with a squashed nose, protruding forehead, thin mouth, and brown, hostile, angry eyes that were filled with incandescent rage. This volatile anger that this creature exuded was explosive and tangible. I was terrified more for my beloved pets than myself, because they were cowering and whimpering while lying on the ground in total submission. The creature eyed my animals and lunged towards Myrtle, hissing like a snake. Myrtle was whimpering, and the creature picked him up and threw him across the forest floor like a soccer ball, and thankfully he landed on 2 feet and bolted through the forest at record speed. Never have I seen Myrtle run away so fast. My other dog was now terrified and so incapacitated by fear that he just peed all over the place in terror. The creature grabbed Tiger by his mid-torso as if he weighed nothing and threw Tiger across the ground in fury, and I watched Tiger limping away, whimpering in pain. Now it was me left to face this ominous creature, and I just stood there, not knowing whether to run or to stand still. My instincts were not helping at all, because I had no idea what action I should take. Suddenly I uncoiled the gold necklace around my neck with its blue sapphire pendant, and I put it in the creature's hand. Why I did that, I have no idea. Initially he growled, and then he looked at the pendant, and the light of the sapphire sparkled as the fading beams of sunlight flickered through the trees and somehow lit up the jewel so that it looked quite resplendent. I saw this creature's rage transform into absolute fascination as his sausage-sized hands rubbed the stone with an open curiosity. In that moment I just ran away as fast as I could, tripping over fallen debris on the forest floor, twice over, and spraining my ankle in the process. I half expected to hear the creature racing after me, but all was still, and then I heard this long whistle, which at the time I thought was from a bird, but now I know differently. It clearly seemed my jewel had done the trick, and I had no idea why I had chosen it to wear it that day of all days. Someone was looking out for me. You see, I rarely ever wear jewellery, and what possessed me to wear it that day I do not know. But the creature loved it, that I'm sure of. After the incident, my ankle took a long time to heal, but the emotional trauma lasted far longer. As for my dogs, I promise you they did not eat for an entire week because of anxiety. But thankfully, with a little veterinary help, they are now right as rain, but refuse to go near that forest. Tiger did have to have some surgery on that leg that was badly fractured, but as far as I'm concerned, we got off lightly. I did not tell anyone about my story, as my husband advised me against it, and in my experience, he's usually right about these things like that. So as long as I remain anonymous, he's happy for me to share my story with you. After doing my research on the creature, I know without a shadow of doubt that the creature I saw was a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch or hairy man, if you like. As far as the mystery about the log in the road, I do not know if the Bigfoot did it or Mr. Dixon, so the jury is out on that one, I'm afraid. Yet I do know that the Bigfoot was the one spying on me when I got out of my car. I do hope you enjoyed my story. I really loved your story, and I have to say to you, I'm just so amazed that you got away so scot-free. I mean, really, the dog only breaking his leg, that's nothing compared to what it could have been. And to think about giving the Bigfoot your sparkling pendant, that was genius. I mean, I have heard that Bigfoots are fascinated by anything sparkling. This isn't the first time I've heard that. And what made you think of doing that? I honestly don't know. Well done for thinking of that. It's called My Son's Bigfoot Secret. My name is Yvonne, and I live amidst the scenic rolling hills of Morgan County, Missouri, on about 150 acres of land. We are situated about 15 miles of North Versailles and west of Tippon. Our property is an ideal location for hunting turkey and trophy whitetail. We have well over 40 acres of timber, including ubiquitous trees scattered liberally all over our property, as well as a glorious lake and several stunning ponds. We also keep livestock on our property, which include horses, cattle, a few pigs, and of course free-range chicken, which I love to raise. I have two sons, Cliff, who is 13, and Barry, who's 15, and my children were very outdoorsy. They used to spend countless hours exploring the outdoors. They would regularly go either hunting with turkey with their father or learning to hunt big whitetails on our land. My Bigfoot story came to pass a few months after I noticed my younger son had slipped into a very deep depression, and as a mother I could not understand what on earth was going on with him. My son, who was normally up before the dawn chorus, helping his dad eagerly with the cows or going cycling on his mountain bike on our property with the sheepdog Rover running eagerly behind him, was now sleeping in late every morning until lunchtime and even over the weekends, and he never went out on his bike anymore, nor did he help his father with the cows or ever ride his favourite horse Clover. He just slept the whole time. I would try and encourage him to go on the turkey hunt with his dad, but he refused to go. Things got worse when the school phoned and told me that his grades had rapidly slipped and he had not attended the school sport games he was supposed to be involved in. Worse still, I found out from his two best friends that he had recently distanced himself from them, which was unlike him. My son had always been adventurous, extremely social, fun-loving, and had been popular at school. So what on earth was irking him, I wondered, and why was he so withdrawn? As a mother, you want to make everything right for your son, but my son refused to talk to me. He became defensive and angry, saying that there was nothing wrong with him and to quit bothering him. I took him to see a psychologist, but the woman got nothing out of him at all and said that the only time that she got any kind of response from my son was when his face lit up when he was stroking her 3 little sausage dogs, who warmed to him immediately. You see, my son adores animals. One day my older son was playing with a remote control while we were all eating a TV homemade lasagna and watching TV. And suddenly my older son turned into a program called Finding Bigfoot. Wow, he said, if Bigfoot was real, we could have one on our land. I mean, we've got the water, the food sources. Our land would be the perfect habitat for a creature like this. Pity they're not real, he said. Of course they're not, said my father. I was beginning to worry that you were believing all this hogwash. What about all the sightings people claim to have had, said Barry. Son, I have hunted this land all my life, as my father did before me, and never in my entire life have I ever encountered such a creature. My bet is all these so-called sightings are really bears. Or hoaxes, said Barry, like all that crop circle stuff that made everyone believe they were being made by aliens. And then finally 2 people admitted to making those crop circles, which they did for many years. Well, that's really a whole nother topic, son, that I know nothing about, said my father. As a farmer and a hunter, I can safely say that Bigfoot is just the stuff of myth and legend for a gullible public to soak up. Suddenly my youngest son grew red in the face and looked furious. You, Dad, and Barry are such idiots, he said. You think you know everything, but you know nothing. And with that he stormed out of the television room in a dreadful huff. My husband's jaw hung open in astonishment. What the heck was all that about, he gasped. You clearly hit a raw nerve, Dad, laughed Barry. It's been a while since Cliff has reacted to anything, so things are looking up, I suppose. I was stunned, but also well pleased to finally get an emotional response from my younger son. But why would the subject of Bigfoot get him so flustered, I wondered. The next day, when both my sons went to school, I decided to search Cliff's room. Maybe I'd find some clues about what was upsetting him so much. It did cross my mind that a girl he fancied could have let him down, or maybe he was a victim of bullying, so I needed to find some answers. I dived through his drawers and cupboards, not knowing what I was looking for, and finally I found a pile of papers and was shocked to see that he had done dozens of pictures of Bigfoot. Although these pictures made him look like a cuddly bear, because the creatures looked small and cute. Then I noticed another big picture of an enormous Bigfoot creature that he had scribbled over angrily with a red pen. What the heck was going on? Did my son have some weird obsession with Bigfoot, or had he actually seen one? If he had, that would have explained his defensive behavior towards my husband and Barry the night before. I decided to do some research about Bigfoot myself, and certain things about the creature sparked my attention. For a start, we regularly heard whooping sounds on our land. I had heard them for so long but never examined their sources. I also frequently heard whistling in the forest, but thought that was a bird, and tree knocks I just put down to woodpeckers. Supposing I was wrong, and that Bigfoot could be the one making those ambiguous sounds. So that day I took my ATV and travelled around our vast acreage of land, and even I was surprised at just how huge our land was. Looking for an elusive Bigfoot would be like looking for a needle in a haystack, I thought, and it really was. The first port of call was the lake, and I was searching for large prints in the mud on the side of the lake, but found nothing. And after a long while of searching here and searching there, I became discouraged, and then I had an idea. I'd take my ATV back home and do some hiking of my own in the woods. I felt that maybe my ATV was making way too much noise, alerting the Bigfoot to my presence. My thought was that if I could be quiet, maybe I would be able to sneak around the woods and hide as much as possible in case I did actually spot a Bigfoot. I had spent most of the afternoon looking, and then I came to a wooded clearing near one of the larger ponds, and I noticed a lot of tree limbs had been snapped, which was curious for me. I then looked at the muddy area around the pond and found a humongous footprint. It could have been a bear, I thought, but it could just as easily have been a Bigfoot as well. Then I heard it. Something was whistling and moving towards the pond, so I went and hid behind a large stump of tree and peered at the creature. I was so disappointed. The footprints had been of a bear. There he was, standing there larger than life, and he was big. I was bitterly disappointed and about to make tracks when I heard the creature whistling. Now bears do not whistle, everyone knows that. So I continued to watch the creature, and then he lifted his long arm to scratch his back, and he did not have paws but hands. OMG, I thought in excitement, it is a Bigfoot, a real Bigfoot. I was stunned. Please turn around, I begged in my mind, so that I can have a good look at you with my scope. As if on cue, the creature turned to face my direction. It was distracted by something that was leaping from the pond, and it was a frog. He grabbed the creature and started to eat it, much like a chicken drumstick. The Bigfoot was covered in brown hair that was pretty clumpy, as if he was very badly tangled. He was about 7 foot tall, 500 pounds, and I noticed was especially big across the chest area. And the thing that got my attention were his very long arms that went way beyond the knees, and also the head, which was wallet-shaped. He had a prominent forehead that was deeply furrowed, grey skin, and a few whiskers around the chin area, with a slender mouth. The creature continued to whistle after he'd eaten his snack, and then he glided back through the way he had come, with extraordinary grace on those lean, muscular legs of his. After my Bigfoot encounter, something shifted in me. I would say that all my life I had been the most dreadful cynic, like my husband. The other night, watching that Bigfoot program seemed ludicrous to me. How could a clever, intelligent, educated person believe in a creature like this? And now I had egg all over my face. Yet I was thrilled to be wrong. because the world was now so much more exciting for me, with endless possibilities. If Bigfoot was real, maybe other things I had discounted in the past could be true as well. When my son returned home from school, I asked him to come into my bedroom, as I needed to speak to him urgently about something. He sat warily at the end of my bed, looking anxious and twitching his fingers. "Are you mad at me about my grades?" he asked. "Well, they're not good, are they?" I said. "But that's not what I want to talk to you about. It's about Bigfoot." "What about Bigfoot?" asked my son, turning as white as a sheet. "I've seen him too," I said. "You've seen him?" gasped my son. "Which one?" he asked. "Are there more?" I asked in surprise. "3 that I know of," he said. "They're a family, you see." "How do you know this?" I asked. "'Cause I've seen them." "Wow," I said. "I'm amazed. Why did you not tell me?" "Like you would have believed me," he said. "Our whole family is so skeptical." "That's true," I admitted, "and I do apologize for that." "Why has Bigfoot upset you so much? Has this creature harmed you? I saw all that angry scribbling you did over that large Bigfoot picture of yours." Cliff was furious. "You went through my things," he gasped. "How could you do that, Mother? That's my private stuff." "I want to know what has upset you so much. Recently you've been so withdrawn and depressed." "The big male Bigfoot will not let me play with the little one," he said, suddenly bursting into tears. I cradled Clive in my arms. "Well, maybe he's not comfortable with his child hanging around with you. Just like dads would not be thrilled if he knew you were hanging around Bigfoots." Suddenly we both cracked up laughing at the thought of my cynical husband seeing his son playing with a Bigfoot. So in a nutshell, my son told me that he had been playing with a 3-foot Bigfoot for many weeks. At first the little thing was very frightened of him, but he would talk to the creature and throw him some of his sandwiches from his tuck box. The creature grew to trust him, and they would play together, throwing stones in the pond. They would catch butterflies and then release them, watching them fly away. They would see who would catch a frog first. I liked him or her, he told me, because he made me laugh. He would imitate me in everything I did. He made me laugh so very much. One day the male Bigfoot roared at my son and scared him half to death by chasing after him and waving his fists angry at him. He was not going to hurt me, but I knew he was telling me to stay away from the young one. I have not seen the young one since. "Is that why you've been so sad?" I asked him. "That, and because I could not share my sadness with anyone, because I know that none of you would have believed me." "I do," I told him, cradling him in my arms and kissing him on the head. "I believe you, and I'm going to sort this all out." "How?" asked my son. "Well, I cannot talk to the large Bigfoot on your account, but I can get you your own dog." "Really, Mum?" asked Clive, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I thought you said I'd have to wait until I was older before I got a dog." "Well, a girl is entitled to change her mind," I said. I'm glad to tell you that my son is back to his normal chirpy self. He continued to share his experiences with me about the Bigfoot, and that helped him to heal. As for his new mountain dog, Lassie, well, they're now inseparable. I hope you enjoyed my Bigfoot story. That was a wonderful Bigfoot story. I loved the account. Thank you so very much for sharing it with us. It was incredible that your son's depression was all because he couldn't play with a Bigfoot, that it clearly touched his heart in such a profound way. Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. Do you know how often we hear of cases where someone has a Bigfoot encounter and then they say that they saw a mountain lion or it was a bear or something like that, especially if they are attacked by a Bigfoot, because they're so worried about the ridicule that they may experience by admitting that they'd seen a Bigfoot. Because for so many people, Bigfoot is just an illusion and he doesn't exist. But we know that he does, and that he is the real deal. Anyway, so what happened was this police officer was asked to investigate this case. He was retired, and he had an encounter with a Bigfoot himself. So it's a fascinating story. But before we get started, I just want to say thank you so much to all my wonderful subscribers. I just am the luckiest person to have such amazing people subscribing to my channel. You guys are absolutely amazing and I love you guys lots. Thank you so much for your support. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so. And don't forget to click the notification bell, because then you will always know when my next story is on. And I like to download a different story every single day. So you really don't want to miss out. Let's get started. I know you're going to love the story. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I am from Beaver Creek in Oregon that overlooks the serene, magnificent views over Mount Hood. I'm writing to tell you about my Bigfoot encounter that happened in the fall of 2015. I am 70 years old now and I'm a retired police officer. My wife Hazel and I live in an enchanting, idyllic country post and beam log style home on 40 acres of private, pristine land with glorious, lush green rolling hills, stunning valleys, silvery lakes, enchanting ponds, and let's not forget the ubiquitous trees, both large and small, young and old, dotted around everywhere. As I was retired from the New York police force, I made sure that I made my life as complete and as full as possible, because having seen many officers in my position retire and settle down to a slower pace of life, invariably they no longer felt challenged, and often as a result they would pass away. So I decided I would retire but keep my life challenged and stimulated as much as I possibly could. So I did keep in touch with my friends on the force. I would offer them my wealth of wisdom and years of experience when they needed another perspective on the case. That not only helped them solve cases better, but it invariably gave me a new lease of life and gave me that rush of adrenaline and that buzz that I always had working in the police force. It takes a special type of person to become an officer if you are passionate about solving crimes. It was always in my blood to uncover the body language of a potential suspect, relying a lot on gut instinct and often reenacting a case. Another way I keep myself stimulated is engaging on hunts with some of the locals in this part of the world, who have been teaching me how to refine my skills as a hunter and how to navigate the forests looking for potential great hunting locations. To be a good hunter, you need to incorporate a lot of detective work and skills to figure out where the deer may congregate, and furthermore, you need to learn how to camouflage yourself well enough to ensure that you are not detected by an animal. Because believe me, if you are seen or smelt at all, the game is up and you will almost certainly not return home with a trophy deer or anything at all. One day I was having a beer with my hunting colleagues called Russell. He was telling me about his niece, who I will call Adele for the purposes of this story. One day she went jogging and claims to have been attacked by a mountain lion. I'm afraid I cannot reveal the exact geographical location for reasons of confidentiality in this case. He said that the animal had pounced on her and dragged her into a grassy verge and left her there without even attempting to kill her. The ravine was on a sheer mountainous ridge which was not easy to climb, and it just seemed so implausible that a mountain lion would behave like that. These creatures do not hang around when it comes to killing their prey. Even weirder still, on a medical examination, Adele had absolutely no bruises, drag marks, or even scratches on her body, apart from a handprint. But there was something strange, and it was the black bruise marks of 4 large fingers on top of her arm. A mountain lion does not bruise a person with 4 long finger marks, he reflected. Despite what Adele is saying, there is no way a mountain lion did this to her. So why in the world is she lying to me and to us? Is she trying to protect her abductor? He continued to share with me how traumatized his niece was over the experience. It seemed even days after the event, she was so terrified that she had been unable to speak, and even mentioning the attack made her burst into floods of uncontrollable tears. How was she found? I asked. A dog walker in the lower valley found one of Adele's pink sneakers and recognized it immediately because Adele runs every day and she always wears pink and often encounters all these other dog walkers, so they know her well. The sneaker lay in some grass at the bottom of the ridge. The police were called and organized a search party, and that was when she was found. Even when they rescued her, she barely said a word. I wondered if you could look at the case and talk to Adele, because something's not right here, mate, and I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to know what happened to my poor little niece. Well, I said, before I do anything, I'd like to speak to Adele and go and search the area she was found on the sheer mountainous ridge. I would also like to see if I can find any evidence of that mountain lion activity in the location and where she claims to have been attacked. I could suddenly feel that exciting adrenaline surge I usually got as a police officer pulsing through my body, energizing me with a huge drive to get to the bottom of this case, because I knew I needed answers. I knew something about this girl's story was not adding up. My first port of call was a visit with Adele, who I was told was emotionally unfit to speak to anyone at this stage, but I assured the girl's mother that I only needed a few words. My daughter has not eaten a thing in 3 days, officer, she told me. I have never seen my daughter this withdrawn and this disorientated before. Adele was sitting on her bed, clutching a teddy bear tightly to her chest, almost as if the stuffed animal was giving her some measure of comfort that I thought seemed immature for a girl of 18 years old. Hello, I said, introducing myself. I just want to find out more about your mountain lion attack. You see, the physical evidence from the medical examiner does not line up with your story. You have 4 bruise marks on your hands that appear to be made from a man. Is there someone you are trying to protect? I asked. I'm not protecting anyone, Adele snapped. Why won't anyone believe me about the mountain lion? Because the dots do not add up, I said, and I know that you are not telling the truth. You are covering up for someone, and I want to know why. Who are you protecting? Please go, said the girl. I do not appreciate being hounded like this. If you do not believe me, I do not care. I'm sticking to my story. I was puzzled. Why was this intelligent girl being so evasive, and what on earth was she hiding? I was almost certain that a family member had abducted her, and she refused to blow their cover. This was not the first time I had seen a victim protecting their abductor before. It was quite common. It was all exceedingly odd, the way she was behaving, I thought. I knew the girl was lying for sure, but I also knew that I needed answers. So I drove to the location of the abduction, and what I saw there left me with more questions than answers. The area was strewn with broken tree limbs that had been snapped, and the ground was covered with Adele's sneaker marks, and these huge footprints that were more akin to a bear's than a mountain lion's were everywhere. One thing I did know was that a human could not have such monstrously huge feet, so surely they had to be that of a bear. Looking at the scuff marks in the soil, it definitely looked as if Adele had put up some fight against her abductor, but she had clearly lost that battle. I searched around for telltale marks of a mountain lion, and there were no signs of any such predator. There were no coyote or puma, panther or mountain lion tracks anywhere, which affirmed to me what I knew, that Adele was definitely not abducted by a mountain lion. I decided to investigate the ridge where Adele was found, and believe me, it was sheer, steep and treacherous, and climbing up this thing was so hazardous. I can't even begin to tell you how hazardous it was. I'm a fit man, but climbing that ridge was arduous, and it must have taken agility, strength, perfect balance and coordination to make it up that ridge with Adele. On my approach, I had nearly slipped half a dozen times, and it would not have taken me much to shatter my ankle. I truly did not know what to think, other than the fact that Adele's abductor was in pristine physical condition, with extraordinary agility, which would rule out a lot of potential males as suspects. Whoever abducted Adele was in remarkable shape. Suddenly I came across the grassy verge where Adele had been found, and it was covered with bracken, twigs, fern and branches of pine. It really looked like some kind of a predator's nest. I was growing increasingly confused. Who or what had abducted Adele, I wonder? I decided to investigate the wooded area where Adele runs, and something stood out to me. There were strange markers all around the forest, where bark had almost been cleaned off the tree trunks to reveal the smooth, clean wooden surface beneath. And these areas went up to 8 feet in height. It was like an animal that was extremely tall had been rubbing his body against the tree and shedding away the outer bark so that he could have a good big scratch. Suddenly, as I looked around the woods, I just knew instinctively I was not alone. Something was watching me, and whatever it was exceedingly dangerous. I just knew it. Having worked in the force for many years, I had learnt to rely on my gut instincts, and believe me, my life had been saved multiple times by trusting them. I immediately raised my rifle and peered through the scope, but believe me, there was nothing there. But I felt cold, heartless eyes on me, like that of a savage predator, but I saw absolutely nothing. I stood still like a statue, listening for a moment, and noticed how unusually quiet everything was. So much so, in fact, that it gave a very airy and sinister feeling to the whole area. What in God's name was Adele thinking, I thought, running in an area that felt this menacing? Suddenly I heard this low-pitched guttural growl, and it was directed at me. Ah! I cannot describe that noise because it went right through my whole body, and it had the similar incapacitating effects of a taser, and I kid you not. It was that disorientating and that shocking. I have always been known for remaining calm in a dangerous shootout, but my calmness fled and was replaced with a feeling of impending dread and doom. It was then that I saw it stepping out of its cloak of invisibility into our reality, a creature the likes of what I have never seen before. What on earth was this hideous form that was growling at me? I had never seen anything like it before. Ah! The creature was a 10-foot monster, and he was monstrously huge. Truly, there are no words to describe this bipedal being that looked as if it had stepped out of my darkness nightmare and taken form. The creature was truly no less than 1,000 pounds and maybe more. Bear in mind, I'm a retired officer, so I'm not given to exaggeration. All over his body he was covered in hair, although it was more scant on the groin area, which meant I could see this creature was all male. Also, the face was hairless, the skin grey and thick with deep furrows on the protruding forehead, but it was those furious brown eyes that concerned me the most. They were terrifying, with a predatory look on them that did not spare any punches, as the creature wanted me dead, and there was no time like the present for him to engage in his brutal intentions. For a second, which seemed to last for hours, because it was the longest second of my entire life, I could feel my blood growing cold, and this dull, foreboding ache spread over my entire body as I came to the sudden realization that my life was indeed ebbing away, even before he pulled any punches on me. My hands were sweating so profusely that I could not keep the rifle straight in my hands anymore, and using it on this creature was completely pointless, because I knew this thing was way faster than my hand would be on the trigger. I would be dead before I even attempted to shoot him, and I knew it, that even if I tried in my situation, it would be hopeless for me, and it would be more hopeless than it already was. The creature lunged towards me like a boxer taking a punch, and I knew he wanted to fight me and wanted me to fight him back. I tried to use the back of my rifle like a thrashing arm, but I just landed up thrashing the air because the creature moved away so fast. Suddenly he lashed out at my hand, and I could hear the bone in my wrist shatter, and the pain was so debilitating I screamed out in agonizing pain. Then as I lay, I rolled up in a ball on the ground, crying out in the pain that I was feeling. The creature kicked me with one of his legs, and I could hear my knee shatter and sharp shooting pains rocket through my body like firecrackers. Suddenly I heard the barking of distant dogs as they suddenly ran into the brush towards me with their owner who was walking behind them. I let out a terrified scream, and the dog walker fired some shots in the air. In seconds the creature had vanished, leaving me as a bundle of throbbing pain on the wooded clearing. That dog walker saved my life, even though I gathered later that they did not even get a glimpse of my attacker, but they had sensed something was horribly wrong, which was why they let out the warning shots with their rifle. I was in pain for a very long time and needed knee surgeries and titanium plates in my wrists, so I was out of action for a few long weeks. In that time I did some research and realized that I had been savagely wrestled by a Bigfoot, or a hairy man, or Sasquatch, and suddenly all the pieces of Adele's mysterious abduction started to make sense to me. No wonder Adele was not talking, and neither was I. It was we were hardly about to tell the world that a Bigfoot had very nearly killed me, and he had not enjoyed toying me first before unleashing his final fatal blow. I would almost certainly be dead by now. I was certain of that. When I was completely recovered from my injuries, I went to meet up with Adele at a coffee shop. She ordered a chocolate milkshake, and I had a cafe latte with a blueberry muffin. "What is all this?" asked Adele. "Why did you need to see me?" she asked. "Because," I said, "I know it was a Bigfoot that abducted you that day." Adele almost choked on her milkshake and went a deathly white, and then she began to sob and sob and sob. "Are you all right, ma'am?" asked the waitress curiously. "This gentleman here, he's not upsetting you, is he?" she said, pointing at me with an accusatory look. "No, it's not him," she said. "I'm just over-emotional." It was then that Adele told me what really happened the day that she went for her morning jog. I was running in the woods when something ran through the undergrowth at me like a heavy bulldozer, and before I knew it, I was fighting off this hairy ape-man-like creature. He gripped me powerfully with one of his hands and balanced me on his shoulders, carrying me up that sheer ridge. He was like a trapeze artist because his balance was impeccable. I was terrified because I thought I would fall to my death, but he held me down fast with his strong hands. When he got me on the grassy verge, he started stroking my hair and face as if I was precious to him, almost as if he was seeing me as a potential mate or wife. He even brought me berries and dead birds to eat. I think he thought the ridge would be a perfect hiding place for me. "Wow," I said, "that truly is some story." "Oh, it is," agreed Adele, "and not one I'm willing to tell to just anyone. Can you imagine the ridicule we would get if we vented our stories out there? No one would ever believe us. They did not believe me about the mountain lion account anyway," she laughed. "But so what do I care?" I agreed. The less said about the matter, the better. Adele and I have healed physically, but the emotional ramifications of that attack have left their indelible mark on me, and I know I will never be quite the same again as I was before this tortuous encounter. I hope your listeners enjoyed my story. Well, I just want to say I found the story absolutely phenomenal. I am blown away by this story, and it just speaks of the fact that there are so many people out there hiding their Bigfoot encounters from the public, not wanting to admit that they've had an encounter with a hairy man because they don't want that ridicule. But this creature behaved very differently with Adele to the way he behaved with this male opponent who he saw as an opponent. So it's a fascinating story, and I really loved it, and I hope my listeners enjoyed it too.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Sandy and I'm from a little town in Vermont, but I do not want to reveal all the details about my life because I would like to remain anonymous for obvious reasons, especially because where I live, nothing ever stays secret for very long. Believe me, I know this from bitter experience, and there is nothing worse than gossiping townsfolk. I'm not keen on the idea of being a subject of their tall tales. Do not get me wrong, I love the townsfolk here, but idle gossip, well, it's a way of life here, and I just don't want to be a part of it. For all the doubters out there, it's highly likely that you're going to be cynical about my story, and I can't say that I blame you really. In your shoes, I'd probably feel the same, because my story does sound implausible. Especially my visit to the psychic and my encounter of the hairy man. But I want to assure you that my story is 100% true, and it all starts in 1982. Growing up as a child, I had often driven past the trailer park where there was a sign that said, "Real psychic readings available here from a proper gypsy." Carly had always mentioned how eager she was to go and see a psychic. Carly was my very best friend. So it was on her birthday that I decided to treat her by taking her to a psychic for a reading. It seemed to be a fun idea, but as long as the folks in the town didn't discover our dirty little secret. People in our town shunned the psychic that lived in the trailer park because they all said the practice of divination was both godless and evil. Yet I did have it on good authority that over many years, various town folks had been sneaking visits to see the psychic for a reading when they thought that nobody was looking. And most of those people were in fact churchgoers. The trailer park was situated at the back of the old loggers' road, and there were one or two trailers in a field that looked so old and shabby on the outside that I almost had the second thought about whether we should actually go into one of them. They really did look in desperate need of TLC and were in a state of disrepair. "Did anyone see us, Carly?" I asked, as we curiously sneaked up to the trailer. The last thing we needed was to be the centre of gossip in our town. "No, I think the coast is clear," whispered Carly. "I doubt anyone's seen us." I could see that Carly was looking so excited about the prospect of having her fortune told. As we approached the trailer door, we saw a dirty net curtain twitching, as if someone was having a good long look at us. An elderly lady ushered us in and invited us to sit on this threadbare red couch that looked like it had seen better days. The trailer smelt damp and musty, and we looked around the place curiously, noticing that everything was old, bedraggled, threadbare and shabby, as if the fortune teller herself was very down on her luck. The elderly lady pulled up a chair towards us. She really looked like a real gypsy because her grey curly hair was covered in purple beads, and she wore long dangling golden earrings and hundreds of bracelets on her aging hands that jangled every time she moved them. She was attired in a long red dress with a wraparound knitted poncho that looked almost as old as she was. "What is it you want to know?" she said, in a deep husky voice. Anything really," said Carly excitedly. "A husband, maybe, in the future?" The woman closed her eyes and shook her head. No, I don't see any husband. No, you're not going to get married at all. There won't be any husband. But I do see lots of cats around you. You will have lots and lots of cats, and you will love them." Carly looked stunned. "No husband?" she said, looking aghast. "Are you sure about that?" The lady nodded. "But I hate cats," she protested. "I've always been a dog lover. I've never even owned a cat." The lady then turned her attention to me, and then she grabbed me very tightly and almost violently, and she looked at me through her milky white eyes. "Beware the hairy man," she said. "He's already taken one down, and you may very well be next." "What hairy man?" I asked. I thought she might be referring to my Uncle Bruno, because he was hairy. I didn't know anybody else that was hairy. The woman did not listen, but ushered us out as if she already had been exhausted by us. "Well, that was pretty useless," I said to Carly, feeling very deflated. "I'm so sorry. It really was a waste of time." The woman was barking mad. 2 weeks passed by, and I suddenly received a phone call from a solicitor in Tennessee, telling me that I was the sole beneficiary of my great-uncle Sam's property near Mount Pleasant in Tennessee. "How did he die?" I asked in surprise. I always got the impression that Uncle Sam was as fit as a fiddle and as strong as an ox. He was only 70 years old when he died, and he was robustly healthy, so that was strange. I had never met him before, but I had been told wonderful stories about him. And to think that he had left his worldly assets to me, that was extraordinary. I was touched to the quick. "Well, he was found with his neck broken. It was a terrible accident," said the solicitor. "I'm so sorry for your loss." As I put down the telephone, I could feel my heart fluttering with excitement. I'd never owned anything in my entire life, and now I was an owner of a property in Tennessee. It just didn't get better than that. The next day I decided to pack my bags and go out there as quickly as I could. I would stay on the land and finally make a decision about whether I should sell the place or not. When the taxi drove up the long dirt driveway to my uncle's log cabin, I was amazed how remote the place was and how vast the land. I was the owner of all this, I thought. I could hardly believe it. The sun was setting in a beautiful orange, yellow, mauve and pink tone, and I could hear the sounds of crickets and frogs. It was so gloriously serene here, with the rolling green, lush green countryside and the ubiquitous trees of every single kind imaginable scattered liberally around the land, young and old, small and large. It was just so glorious here. The cabin itself was large and spacious, made from 100-year-old timber, and it was a quality home that really needed a modern makeover, because judging by the 1970s decor, it was stuck in a time warp. I suddenly remembered that Uncle Sam's wife Maggie had died in the late 1970s, which might explain the outdated furniture, because nothing had been done to the place since then. Uncle Sam had been an outdoorsy person that spent most of his time outdoors, and he was a great tracker, a phenomenal hunter, and an amazing fisherman. All the trappings of his outdoorsy life were strewn around the living room and clearly apparent. Even his large rifle collection was in a state of disarray, which was surprising for Uncle Sam because he was remarkably meticulous about his rifle. I noticed that all his bullets lay scattered out of their containers all over the floor, as if Uncle Sam had been in a hurry to fill his rifle with pellets. There were binoculars on the settee and a book on eagles and their nesting habits on a side table, along with the book of Habits of Primates. How odd, I thought. Uncle Sam interested in monkeys? They're not exactly native to North America. There was a notelet on a piece of bright pink paper with the word Sasquatch written on it, followed by a huge question mark. I did not have a clue what that meant. I found the remains of poor Uncle Sam's last meal on a plate in the living room, with the evident stains of evaporated coffee still left in the mug. How sad, I thought. I wonder how he snapped his neck. The following day I was up at the crack of dawn to the sounds of birds tweeting. It was a magnificent day, and as fall was approaching, the leaves were suddenly changing colour, so they were red, green, gold, and mauve, and they made the valley look even more enchanting and magical. I could see in between the trees dozens of white-tailed deers looking at me. I loved the way they twitched their beautiful white tails, and to look at their gentle and serene expressions was just so lovely. I decided to walk around the valley and take in as much scenery as I could. It was so gloriously beautiful here, but the place was too big for me, I decided. I knew I needed to renovate the cabin and put in some modern touches in order to get the best place of the property. Fast forward a couple of months, and the renovations to the cabin had begun and were going exceedingly well, but something was happening every single night that set my nerves on edge. I would hear terrible screams coming from the forest that sounded like a woman being murdered. I would also hear whooping sounds that I could not identify, and owl hoots, and so many of those owl hoots that you could be forgiven for believing there was an owl parked on every single tree. Something wasn't right, and I could feel it in my gut. And there were occasions during the day when I ate my sandwiches on that wooden deck that I had the distinct feeling that unseen eyes were watching me, and it creeped me out. One night I was woken up to these loud banging noises all around my property, on the trees and on the cabin itself. It sounded like someone was deliberately pounding a piece of timber and making a very big deal about it. When I ventured outside, I could see nothing, but I detected this awful sulphur-like odour that made me violently throw up. Something or someone was trying to scare me, and I had seen a dark shadow slipping into the forest, so I was convinced that it was a trick of the light, but now I was sure it was somebody. Whoever this intruder was on my land, he was trying to deliberately scare me. Maybe he was the one making the screaming noises at night and the owl calls, and maybe he was the one that was banging the door like an angry madman. I now felt angry about being subject to such harassment and abuse, and I was determined that come what may, I would drive this intruder off my land, and even call the police if it came to that. I imagined that this man was living on my land in a makeshift tent, and the next morning I ventured deep in the forest to see if I could find it. I took one of my uncle's high-powered rifles that was not something I was practiced or skilled at using. In fact, to be honest with you, I've never used a rifle in my life. But I needed to look the part, even if it meant bluffing the intruder. Surely I would come across as intimidating. I boldly walked through the forest with a dogged determination to get this guy off my land. I could smell him everywhere. The place smelt rancid and horrible. That nasty sulphurous odour was everywhere. So I knew I was getting close, and I could feel his steely eyes on me. I also began to wonder if he might be an insane sort of person, someone who could have escaped from a mental asylum, or a deranged killer of some kind. I just felt this sense of a menacing presence, and I knew that I wasn't imagining it. It sounds weird, but my instincts were telling me that I was in danger, so that was when I decided to call the police. "Yes, sir," I said. "Yes, that's the address. No, I've not seen him, but he is here, and I think he's highly dangerous. Yes, I'm in the forest on the left-hand side of the valley. Get here as soon as you can." Suddenly I saw a movement, and I raised my rifle as quickly as I could. "Come out," I shouted. "The game's up. You're trespassing on private land, and the police are on their way." Suddenly I heard the thunderous sound of a heavy rustle, and I could hear twigs being snapped and golden oak leaves being crunched under feet. This man, whoever he was a hefty weight, and he sounded like a rhino in a thicket. Then I saw him, but this was no man. Standing before me was a fearsome bipedal humanoid predator-like being. more terrifying and intimidating than any monster movie I have ever seen in my life. No, surely this was my wild imagination. This ghastly creature could not be real. I pinched myself to make sure I was not dreaming, and I was horrified to realize that this creature of 8 foot tall, 600 pounds, red-brown hair, was as real as you and I. The creature had a bullet-shaped head, a long, weathered, humanistic, primate-like face, but it was the look in those hostile brown eyes that had my heart racing at 100 miles an hour. I could sense that this thing despised the very sight of me, and I'm certain, in fact, I'm not certain, I know he wanted me dead. Every sense in my body heightened me to this revelation. I had no experience in using a rifle, but I trembled so much with fear, I just knew that I would probably be better off if I didn't use it at all. Why was I not running away? I did not know the answer to that question. I could feel that I had soaked my pants, I'm embarrassed to admit. But I seemed absolutely unable to move a muscle. I just stood there in stunned stupor, staring in horror at this creature, as if I was waiting for my inevitable demise that was so clearly on the cards. There was no doubt about that in my mind. What was I waiting for, I wondered? The creature roared at me like a great big lion, but the sound was so much more terrifying that it made me disorientated and dizzy. The sound went through my body, causing it to vibrate, and my head began to throb violently. The creature seemed to be enjoying my terror, and he was toying with me as if he wanted to have fun with his dinner before finally consuming it. The creature lunged towards me in a mock charge. Then he pounded his chest violently in a show of dominance, and then he picked me up and threw me over his shoulders as if I was a sack of oranges. I started to scream at the top of my lungs, and I kicked my legs violently, but he held me with a firm grip in his huge hairy hands. Suddenly I heard the sound of distant shooting, getting closer and closer to the forest. The creature suddenly stood still for a second, as if deciding what on earth he should do. He then slung me on the ground, where I luckily landed on a huge pile of fallen oak leaves that cushioned the blow. The hairy thing then bolted through the forest like a bulldozer, and then he was gone. All was quiet for a moment, and the police arrived, checking to see that I was all right. I told them that a hairy man had bolted off into the woods, and they did try to run after him, but he had vanished. The officer commented on how huge the man must have been, because they had seen muddy footprints at the edge of the forest that were 16 inches big. That was no human, said the other officer. That was a bear with feet 16 inches big. I said nothing. I just told them a hobo with a lot of red-brown hair had been living in the woods and scaring me half to death, and they accepted my story. I was not about to tell them about this monster-like being, because I knew that they would never believe me. I wasted no time in selling my uncle's property. I did not want to hang around the place knowing that the creature could be around, because if he came back for me another time, I would be unlikely to escape with my life. Suddenly I remember my visit from the psychic and her warning about the hairy man who had already killed someone else. Suddenly I could make sense of my uncle's death. It had clearly been no accident. No wonder unused bullet shells were falling out of their packages in a haphazardous mess all over the floor. Maybe he'd been in a rush to load his rifle as the predator ventured closer to him near the time of his untimely demise. I imagine the creature just snapped his neck with one whack of his monstrous hands. I remember the book on primates my uncle had been reading, and the note with the word Sasquatch on it. Later I was to learn that Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, are another name for the hairy man. My uncle clearly had seen this creature, which would explain the research he had been doing. I'm in no doubt he feared for his life and was being hounded by the creature. Bear in mind, in those days we did not have access to the World Wide Web, the internet or Facebook, so people in that time would never have known what this thing was. I also did not until the day when our technology changed and advanced, and information about unusual creatures became much more accessible. On the subject of my best friend Carly, to date, she has never ever married. One day she rescued a kitten from drowning in a heavy rainstorm, and she was so smitten by the little thing that she started rescuing other cats. When I go and see her in our house, she's literally surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of cats. You would think that the place would stink, but it doesn't, because she looks after those cats as if they were her children. In Vermont, they call her the crazy cat lady, so the psychic was right about her too. So there you are. That's my story. I want to just say that that was the most phenomenal story. I just love the fact that you encountered the hairy man, and what an extraordinary story that was. And I know that everybody loved it. You know that there are so many people who in North America vacate and just disappear from their property and the place becomes abandoned. Well, this is one of those stories where our listener called Tammy actually buys a place and she finds out what actually happened to the missing people on her property. She actually was able to resolve this mystery, and I know you're going to enjoy the story. But before we start, I want to send my love to all my listeners around North America, Kenya, Canada, and all the rest of the world. And I just want to send my biggest regards and love to all my subscribers. You are exceptional. I just love you guys so very much. And thank you so much for all your continued support. It means the absolute world for me. And I just love the fact that you guys are so passionate about the hairy man. Isn't it wonderful that we have this in common? It's just something that intrigues us so much, and it's just the most exciting thing. Anyway, let's get started. Dear Sarah, my name is Tammy, and I'm originally from Colorado, but my Bigfoot encounter happened when I bought an abandoned home for myself in Kentucky, in a heavily wooded area off a long dirt road. It was on about 40 acres of land that had now become a rambling, dense, overgrown thicket. The house was a circa 1840 farmhouse and was in such a dreadful state of disrepair, and the whole place was falling apart and needed to be thoroughly renovated and restored. The family disappeared from this home in 1987 and had stopped paying their utility bills and taxes, and they never changed their home address either, after that through the US Postal Service. It was all very, very strange, but I dismissed all those revelations and never gave them a second thought, because I was buying this house for next to nothing, and I didn't want any negative thoughts about the previous residents to hijack my desire to buy the place. When I bought the house, it came with all the previous owner's possessions that were still there. It was almost like they had left in a huge hurry, and even their really good quality cars were still left on the property. The family photographs remained on the walls and showed pictures of a young mother and a father, with one girl who looked about 10 years old in the photographs and a boy who looked as if he was 12. I packed the cardboard boxes, which I placed all the family's possessions inside, some that were good enough to be used again, which I gave to a charity, and other stuff that had to be thrown away because it was either too weathered or was so personal to the family and would have not been of interest to anyone else. It really felt so sad to say goodbye to someone's whole life and to their worldly possessions, so I decided to keep back a couple of family photos to remember them by. As I did this, I did fight back a few tears, wondering why the family had suddenly vanished off the face of the earth, never to be seen or heard from again. I did stumble across a child's diary, which I put away with the photographs I was keeping, as well as a bunch of letters tied up in red ribbon. I thought they might be old love letters, and as a romantic at heart, I love reading stuff like that, even though I know it's really not my business. After I had cleared the house, I organised a team of workers to help me restore the place into pristine condition. I was able to keep some of the original panes of glass in the French windows, and they were a lovely feature because they really do not make glass panes like that today. I was able to keep the original wooden banisters and the wooden floors. There were some pieces of furniture in the house, like the stunning wooden antique beds and side tables that were from the year 1825, and I kept them because they were in remarkably beautiful condition and were stunning antiques. I also got the family fridge from 1925 restored so that it is now fully functional in my kitchen and is an added feature that all my guests comment on and admire. I painted the roof a lovely green colour, and the walls were painted white in keeping with the style of the house. I managed to blend old and new together, and the result was a newly revived 1840 farmhouse in remarkably good condition. I also got a highly skilled team of people to fix up the garden and remove some of the excess thicket and rambling overgrowth in the surrounding woods. When everything was finished, I was ready to move in, and I could hardly wait. The house looked beautiful against a backdrop of green rolling valleys and a stream that ran through the right-hand side of the land. I was thrilled to see an abundance of just natural wildlife. It was beautiful. My family, which included my husband Terry, my son Piers, and my daughter Jolene, all moved into the house about 2 weeks after the completion date. And when I moved into the place on that very first night, I knew that something wasn't right. I felt it in my gut, but I couldn't explain that feeling. Something felt very off, and even Piers commented that something about the place was odd, and he couldn't figure out why. A week after moving into the house, I finally got a visit from the next door neighbour, who called herself Dot. She welcomed me into my new home with a homemade chicken pie, which was a speciality of hers, and it really tasted delicious. It was what Dot told me that really made me very concerned. I gathered that she had known the original family very well, and she said that the week before they had vanished, she noticed the family was on edge about something, and she said they had put heavy bolts and double locks on all the doors, as if they were keeping something out. It seemed that they were living in fear by the way that they were behaving, and she noticed that the mother had suddenly lost a lot of weight over a very short period of time, which she believed was stress-related. When I came to visit them, she told me, they were all looking over their shoulders, and they appeared very nervous. They would immediately lock the door if I came to visit them, and bolt it behind them. Something they had never done before when I dropped in to say hello. Another thing, she continued, is they never mentioned any desire to leave their property. And I know they never had financial problems, because when I needed a loan, they just gave me the money and told me that they could afford to give it to me. They always bought expensive cuts of meat from the butcher. They bought quality cars and sent their children to expensive schools. After those revelations, the gnawing feeling in my gut got extremely bad, and I just knew something terrible had happened to the family on this property. I realised that all those deadbolts Dot had told me about must have been deliberately removed before the house by the sellers to avoid any awkward questions. I know if I had seen those deadbolts myself, I would have had second thoughts about purchasing the property. When I told my husband the story, he suggested that a manic relative may have given the family a hard time, which was why they left their home in a hurry. I was not convinced by that idea. I suddenly remembered the child's diary, and I decided to look through it. I noticed comments like, "Mummy is sad today because the thing came again." And then there was a picture of a lady frowning, done by the child. There were also pictures of this hairy-looking creature looking through the window, and a picture of her mother crying, and it looked very odd. I didn't know what to make of it. I read all the letters tied up in a red ribbon and noticed that they were from New Zealand, from a lady called Hannah. One comment in the letter from this lady got my attention. "Have you spoken to the police about the problem? You never know, they may be able to help. And even if they do not believe you, in my experience, they need to investigate your claims anyway. If the whole family testifies to what is happening to you, why on earth would they doubt your story? All four of you should be credible witnesses." Fast forward a few weeks, and I had finally settled into my home with my family, and things were going exceedingly well for us. I had put my worries about the previous owners to one side, until one morning we woke up to find all our 10 chickens had vanished, and there was a pile of their feathers everywhere, including all 10 of their snapped heads that were lying all over the ground. I was shocked by these strange happenings and who had done this, because they had killed and plucked my chickens at the same time, but on my property of all things. I mean, who does that? I really thought that this was the actions of a madman and not an animal. Then the following night my son came rushing into my bedroom, and he was frozen with terror, saying that there was a face at the window looking at him with red eyes and pointing a finger at him, indicating for him to open the window latch. I was horrified by his revelations and didn't know what to think or make of them. The following night my son insisted on sleeping with my husband and I because he was so terrified about the face he had seen at the window coming back. Suddenly my daughter came running into my bedroom the following night, and she also had seen the face appearing at the window, and the face had also indicated to her to open the latch. So the same thing that happened to my son had been happening to her as well. Now I've had 2 children refusing to sleep in their own beds at night because of the scary face that they saw with the red eyes. 3 nights went by and my whole family was now sleeping in my bedroom. One night I was woken to the sound of something rifling through the dumpster, and I decided to investigate. So I went into the kitchen because the outside light was motion activated and the dumpster was on the left-hand side of the back door that faced the edge of the wooded valley. In the dim energy-saving light, I got a glimpse of a huge bipedal creature that was so huge there was no way this thing was human, nor was it a bear. It had a strange bullet-shaped head, long arms and red eyes. I watched this thing slam down the bin it had been rifling through, and then it proceeded to run through the forest at a lightning speed. I could hardly believe what I had been seeing. Could this creature be the thing that the young child had drawn in her pictures and had caused the people in the house to flee? Suddenly the pieces seemed to fit together, and I knew I needed to investigate those woods, but I wasn't going to tell my husband about my plans. The next day, armed with a hunting rifle, I entered the wooded area to see if I could find any signs of this thing, whatever it was. As I went through the wooded area, something did not feel right. I do not know much about woods, but I do know that the place was eerily quiet when I entered it. I searched the woods and was about to give up as I could see no trace of the creature, and then some shafts of sunlight came through the trees, and they seemed to highlight something white shining in an area of rambling thicket. I walked over to the spot and discovered a large creature's nest that I knew at once belonged to the creature I had seen the previous night. I could see a large yogurt tub that I had thrown out the previous day because it had passed its sell-by date and was full of yogurt, lying in the nest along with other animal bones. I now had evidence that this creature was living in our woods, and as I continued looking through the stuff in the creature's nest, I came across a human skull, and I could hardly believe my eyes. I knew at once that the skull belonged to a family member that had vanished from the property. This dangerous creature, whatever it was, must have killed those people. I immediately raced through the forest as fast as I could, because I knew that if this creature saw me, I would end up as another skull in the nest, and I really doubted that my high-caliber rifle would offer me much protection against this beast. If it was that easy, surely the father of the original property would have been able to kill the thing that had been hounding them for so long. To cut a long story short, the police were called, and then an army truck arrived at our home, and there was also a helicopter used in the whole operation. I could hear a massive shootout taking place, and I saw these soldiers carrying this massive body bag, and it took 7 strong men to carry this thing out of the woods and lower it into the back of the army truck. I knew they had killed the creature. I also saw that they had recovered all the bones that the creature had in its nest, and I'm sure some of them must have been the human bones of that family. A day or so later, I received an official visit from a man in a black suit, who was some kind of government official, and he told me to keep my mouth quiet about what I had seen. When I asked what the creature was that killed the family, he told me it was a bear, which I know is an outright lie, because when I saw that creature, and my children saw it as well, they saw that humanoid face in the window, and it was definitely no bear. Anyway, after all this stuff transpired, our home became a dreamy place to live in again, and suddenly our wooded area has attracted even more abundant wildlife, which has been especially wonderful for my children to enjoy. It took several years before I knew that the monster that tormented us was indeed a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. Sometimes I used to think of this poor family and the last night of their lives. I did wonder if one of those kids could have opened the latch to let the thing in, even though the place was bolted up. Kids can sometimes naively do silly things unintentionally. I do hope your listeners enjoyed my story. You know, I find that story incredibly fascinating, and I do wonder if some of the disappearing people are attributed to Bigfoots or other cryptid-like creatures. Who knows?
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.